Alright, welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be looking at this interesting old book about ancient Egyptian offering ceremonies. This book was first published about 115 years ago, which means it's almost as old as the oldest living person today. I just think it's amazing to think about how old this is, and also it makes me think about how hard it is to imagine how back then a lot of the tools and media that are so essential to us now and that we use every day just didn't exist. For example, there was no internet, no TV, and radio and films were still new and pretty rudimentary, but books in some form have been around for thousands of years. Anyway, this book that we're going to look at today, it was written by a famous Egyptologist named Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge, and here's a picture of him. And that picture is from this article, which was printed in 1920 in the Illustrated London News, and shows people who had just recently been knighted. So he was also a knight. The picture was taken about 11 years after he published the book we're going to look at, though, so I don't think he was a knight at that time when he wrote this book. E.A. Wallace Budge wrote extensively on ancient Egypt, and the large number of books that he published made the study of the subject more accessible to the public. He was a pretty important and influential person in his time, but many of the works that he wrote are now considered outdated by modern-day scholars. His works are still interesting, though, especially for anybody just beginning to learn about Egypt. I think they're fun to read, and I think they provide a good jumping-off point for further studies. And these books that I'm showing in the background, this is just a selection of some of his books. He wrote a lot of other books too, and these are just the ones that I have. Alright, so this is the book that we're going to be looking at today. On the front cover here, you can see that it's part of a series called Books on Egypt and Chaldea. There's also a nice floral decoration around the border here. The cover is made out of this sort of reddish-brown cloth, which is still in really good condition. On the spine, we can see the title, which is The Liturgy of Funerary Offerings, and then the author's name, Budge, as well as the publishing house at the bottom, Keegan, Paul, Trench, Trubner & Co. The spine is in pretty good shape, and there's nothing of note on the back cover, really. The pages are only cut smooth on the top, which I personally like that, because I think it gives it a certain character to the book that makes it feel more ancient. Alright, let's open it up and take a look. Okay, and we've got a funny little book plate there from a previous owner, and then the abbreviated title page here. We can see it's volume 25 of the series, and then the title is given, and then we have the full title page here. So this is the Liturgy of Funerary Offerings, the Egyptian text with English translations, by E.A. Wallace Budge, and he was the keeper of the Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities in the British Museum, with 107 illustrations in the text. And then we can see it was published in 1909. And then we've also got this dedication here to the Earl Percy. I dedicate these little volumes on the Liturgy of Funerary Offerings and the Book of Opening the Mouth. And then we also have the hieroglyphics there for that as well. Alright, and this is the preface. It says, the present volume contains the Egyptian text and English translations of 2 copies of one of the most important documents connected with the dead, which have come down to us, namely, a detailed list of the offerings which were made to the dead, and also of the consecrating formulae which were recited by the chief officiating priest, as he presented them to a mummified body or to a statue of the deceased. The ancient title of the composition, if it ever had one in early days, is unknown to us, but it has been called the Liturgy of Funerary Offerings, because the document deals exclusively with the presentation of offerings to the dead, and because this title is convenient for reference. This liturgy is associated in the funerary texts in the tombs and papyri with another work entitled The Book of Opening the Mouth, and this fact suggests that it is a portion or a supplement to it, and that it is a development of the canonical list of offerings, which we have reason to believe was in existence under the 3rd or 4th dynasty. We know that funerary chapels were attached to the pyramids and mastaba tombs of this period, and that offerings of meat and drink were made in them to the dead daily by properly qualified priests. It follows as a matter of course that the proceedings of the priests were regulated by some system, and that some kind of written service must have been recited regularly, and we are justified in believing that the liturgy of funerary offerings was that which was commonly said for kings and other royal personages, and for men of high civil and ecclesiastical rank. And then it says, in the case of the Book of Opening the Mouth, the object of the recital was, in the earliest times at least, to bring about the reconstitution and resurrection of the dead man, and even in later times, when the work was recited before a statue, on which the accompanying ceremonies were performed, the idea of the Egyptians on this matter remained unchanged. It must be remembered also that the Egyptians intended by means of ceremonies and formulae to bring back the ka, or double, either to the dead man from which it had been temporarily separated, or to a statue which represented him, and when this had been done, they believed it to be their bounden duty to provide meat and drink for its maintenance. It was the ka and the heart soul, ba, not the spirit soul, ku, which fed upon the offerings, and if meat and drink of a suitable character and in sufficient quantity were not provided for them, these suffered from hunger and thirst, and if the supply of offerings failed, they perished by starvation. The texts make it quite clear that the Egyptians believed in a dual soul. One member could not die, but the other only lived as long as it was fed with offerings by the living, and provided with an abode, i.e. a statue. Offerings were brought to the funerary chapels and tombs daily, and additional gifts were presented on the days of all great festivals. And so that's just a sort of introductory remarks in the preface, and then here we have the table of contents. We can see it's separated into these two classes of ceremonies. And in the first we just have, I think, 6 ceremonies, and in the next sections we have all of these. So that gives you some sense of how much is contained in this book. And then towards the end we have an index. This is a list of all of the illustrations here. And then we have the actual beginning of Chapter 1. The tombs, temples, and religious literature of all periods of the history of Egypt proclaim with no uncertain voice that the ancient Egyptians believed in the resurrection of the dead, and that they possessed an innate conviction that the souls of the blessed renewed their existence in the world beyond the grave, under circumstances and conditions which gave them happiness and prevented them from dying a second time. The consistent, persistent, ineradicable, and unalterable belief in immortality is the chief fundamental of the Egyptian religion, and the attainment of everlasting life was the end to which every religious ceremony was performed and every funerary text written. Okay, so as we saw in the table of contents, there are 114 funerary ceremonies that Budge describes in this book. And Budge organizes those ceremonies into 3 different groups. The first group contains these 6 ceremonies. And then the second group contains the next 32 ceremonies, which are shown here. And then the final group contains the next 76 ceremonies, which are all shown here. Let's take a closer look at one of these ceremonies, and we might as well start with the very first one that's described in the first group. Okay, so here's the first ceremony. The first ceremony, to cleanse and purify the statue so that it might become a suitable and permanent dwelling place for the ka, was the object of the first ceremony. The Sem priest took up a vessel filled with clean water. You can see the illustration there, in which salt or soda had been dissolved, and poured it into a bowl which was held in the hands of an assistant. He walked next around the statue 4 times, sprinkling the salted water on it on all sides, and perhaps washing portions of it, and meanwhile the Kerheb said 4 times, "O Osiris, Everything which is hateful in Unas hath been carried away for thee. For that which was uttered in his name of evil hath Thoth come, and he hath carried it away to Osiris. I have brought that which was spoken in the name of Unas of evil, and have placed it in the palm of thy hand. The saw shall not be separated from thee, and thou shalt not be separated from it. So that's a description of the first ceremony there. And we can see this illustration where it shows the sem-priest pouring water from a libation vase into a libation bowl held by a ministrant. And it continues, from the way in which Osiris is mentioned in this passage, it is clear that the cult of this god was general in Egypt when this liturgy was drawn up, and that he was already recognized as the god of the dead. The effect of the sprinkling of water over the statue, or the washing of it with water, was to remove the sins of the deceased from him, and to cleanse his body in Ka. There can be no doubt that the Egyptians in all periods attached very great importance to the use of water ceremonially, and there is good reason for believing that they regarded it as one of the principal sources of life, since the gods were created from water, and Nu, the great god of the celestial deeps, was the father of the gods. They believed that water possessed a mysterious power which made itself manifest under the form of life, and it may be noted in passing that in the scenes in which Thoth and Horus are pouring out water over the heads of kings, the water is indicated by series of Ankh signs, i.e. life, life, life. Dermichen has already in his connection pointed out the fact that in the tale of the two brothers, Anpu put the heart of his younger brother Bata into a vessel of water. When the heart had absorbed all the water, it came to life. Water not only washed away sin, but gave new birth and life to the dead. The Gnostics, who preserved many Egyptian beliefs, attached great importance to the use of water ceremonially, and according to Irenaeus, they threw oil and water over the heads of the dying to make them invisible to the powers of darkness. The ancient Egyptians certainly dissolved salt or soda in some form in their holy water, and it is probable that they pronounced some formula over it before sprinkling it upon the dead. The sprinkling of the dead was the first and most important of burial ceremonies among the Egyptians for thousands of years, and it is probable that it was adopted under the name of baptism of the dead by many sections of the Christian church. For centuries, certain Christians actually baptized the dead, and they continued to do so in spite of the prohibitions of many councils. Alright, so that was a full description of the first ceremony, with some additional information as well. And now I'm just going to sort of thumb through and show you some of the different pages, and just so you can get a sense of what it's like to flip through this book. One of the things that I really like about E.A. Wallace Budge's different books is that in most of them that I've found, he includes a large amount of direct hieroglyphics. So it gives you sort of the source material for you to interpret yourself. And along those lines, I thought it would be fun to share just some basic information about how to read hieroglyphic images. So just really, really basically, we can take a look at this hieroglyphic text here. And with hieroglyphics, it can be written from left to right, right to left, but it's always written top down, never from bottom up. But to figure out where the beginning of the text is, all you need to do is look for the living creatures in the text and see where they're facing. So these birds here, they're all facing in this direction, which means that the beginning of the text is that way. I just think that is a really cool feature of the language. Another thing to note is that some characters are phonetic and have phonetic meaning, and then other characters don't have a phonetic meaning and are just sort of word accents. So they are determinatives that tell you what the word you are reading is related to. They might tell you if it's a town name, or they might tell you if it's related to writing or related to other activities. And these oval shapes here are called cartouches, which comes from a French word which means cartridge, like a cartridge that you would insert into a gun or something like that. and they're called that because they sort of resemble those things. But what they are is they're markings that indicate a name of an important person. So the name is written inside of this oval-like ring. And so if you look at a text and you see a bunch of those shapes or those markings, you can figure out, oh, this is in reference to a particular person or a particular important person, and their name is inside of that cartouche. And in their names, they would often transcribe the position of certain important syllables to the beginning of the name, even when, if you were saying the name, it was something that was said at the end of the name. So like you have Tutankhamun or something like that, you might put the Amen part at the beginning of the name. That's called honorific transposition, and that happens a lot in their names. The symbol for the sun, which is Ra, you can see it here. It's gonna occur at the beginning of the name. So at the beginning of the cartouche, in pretty much every case I can think of, because they have such a high reverence for that thing, it comes first. And then one final thing, here you can see just a really common abbreviation of the name Osiris. And if you can recognize Osiris, you'll be able to point it out in a lot of different texts just because it's so common. And you can recognize it from the eye and the little staircase. Alright, so that's the Liturgy of Funerary Offerings by E.A. Wallace Budge. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you like the video, please leave us a like or a comment and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm going to continue to try to put out things as often as I can, and I'm trying to kind of step up the quality of each video as much as I can as well, and just show you things that are interesting. And eventually I'm going to be working on a Patreon where I can upload high-quality scans of as many books as I'm able to, and if you want to check that out eventually, I should have links to that in the descriptions for these videos. Alright, well, thanks so much. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.